Picture this. You spend 2 years planning the perfect heist. You study the target. You build a team. You dig a tunnel straight underneath the most heavily guarded building in the city. You crack the vault. You take everything inside. And you walk away feeling like an absolute genius. But then, years later, you find out something that makes your stomach drop. The bank manager knew about your tunnel before you dug the first inch of it. He knew your whole plan. He let you dig anyway. He left the vault open on purpose. And the entire time, you thought you were outsmarting him. He was using you, feeding you exactly what he wanted you to hear. Watching you throw a party for a win that was never actually yours. You didn't rob the bank. The bank robbed you. That gut punch feeling, that specific moment when you realized the whole game was rigged before it even started. That is exactly what the CIA felt one morning in the spring of 1956. And the story of how it happened is genuinely one of the craziest things that has ever gone down in the entire history of espionage. This is Berlin, 1954. Nothing here is what it looks like. To understand why this story is so insane, you need to understand what Berlin actually was in 1954. This was not a normal city. This was the most dangerous square mile on the planet. World War II had ended less than 10 years earlier. Germany was split down the middle. Berlin was split down the middle. And right there, in that divided city, the two most powerful nations on Earth were staring at each other across a line that neither one could cross without starting World War III. The fear was everywhere, and it was completely rational. The Soviets had exploded their first hydrogen bomb in 1953. 1 year before this story begins, the United States no longer had a monopoly on weapons that could flatten entire cities. Both sides knew that if the other one decided to move, really move, the result would be the end of human civilization as anyone had ever known it. So both sides did what scared people do. They watched each other obsessively. Every move, every communication, every military decision, every troop transfer. If you could know what the other side was planning, even 24 hours before they moved, that knowledge was worth more than any weapon. And here was the problem for the CIA. The Soviets had figured out that radio communications could be intercepted. So they had done something smart. They had laid physical telephone cables, actual copper wire, under the streets of East Berlin. Cables running from Soviet military headquarters all the way back through Eastern Europe to Moscow. Underground, buried, invisible from the air, impossible to tap without physically touching the wire. You cannot hear a conversation happening inside a buried copper cable from the surface, unless you dig down to it. Now here is where a CIA officer named Bill Harvey enters the story. And if you had to design the perfect person to come up with an idea this crazy, Harvey was your guy. Harvey was old FBI, transferred to the CIA, built like a fire plug, famously never seen without a weapon on his person. Drank martinis for breakfast. Not a metaphor, literally martinis. His colleagues called him the Pear because of his shape and because he was tough as hell on the outside and absolutely unpredictable on the inside. And Harvey had a map. On that map was a spot in the Alt-Glienicke district of East Berlin where 3 Soviet military telephone cables ran together underground, less than 20 feet below the surface, within striking distance of the American sector. He looked at that map for a long time. And then he proposed something that made the room go quiet. What if we just dig to it? Not a small operation, not a probe, a full tunnel. 1,500 feet of hand-dug tunnel running from a CIA warehouse in West Berlin, disguised as an Air Force radar installation, straight under the border and directly to those cables. The cost would be massive. The risk would be enormous. And if the Soviets ever found out, the consequences were genuinely unthinkable. CIA Director Allen Dulles approved it anyway. Construction on the tunnel began in September 1954. And I need you to really stop and think about what that actually meant. Because digging this tunnel was not an engineering challenge. It was a psychological one. You are 20 feet underground, in the dark, in complete silence. Because you cannot make noise, not a single sound above what is absolutely unavoidable. Because Soviet military patrols walk directly above your head on the street above. Every shovel of dirt has to come out quietly. Every support beam has to go in quietly. Every drill, every saw, every hammer, used at a fraction of its normal force, wrapped in cloth to muffle the sound, in a space barely wide enough to turn around in. And you do this every single day, for 8 months. The tunnel ran 1,476 feet. That is nearly 5 football fields, dug by hand, one shovel at a time, under an enemy city, with 750 Soviet troops stationed in the area above it. Now here is the part that should make your head spin. Where did the dirt go? You cannot just dump 3,000 tons of East Berlin soil in West Berlin. Someone will notice, someone will ask questions, someone will start doing math. So the CIA built a fake warehouse above the tunnel entrance, and every single bag of dirt that came out of that tunnel, and there were thousands of them, got quietly stacked inside that warehouse, behind false walls, in carefully organized piles, day after day after day. 3,000 tons of dirt, hidden inside a building, right next to a working U.S. Air Force base. They pulled it off. But then came the moment that almost ended everything before they even reached the cables. It was winter, and the tunnel was warm. The equipment generated heat. The workers generated heat. And that heat had nowhere to go except up, slowly rising through 20 feet of frozen Berlin soil toward the surface. And one morning, someone on the East Berlin street above noticed something. A perfectly straight line in the snow where the ground was slightly warmer than everything around it, starting at the American sector border, running due east for exactly 1,476 feet, pointing like an arrow at the location of the Soviet cables. Think about that for a second. Months of perfect operational security. Months of silence and careful work and hidden dirt and fake radar stations. And the ground itself was about to give them away. The CIA engineers went into emergency mode. They installed refrigeration units along the entire length of the tunnel, cooling the air inside before it could reach the soil above. It took weeks. It cost a fortune. And it worked. The line in the snow disappeared. Nobody on the Soviet side ever mentioned it in any report that has since been declassified. Whether they noticed and said nothing, or genuinely never caught it, nobody knows for certain to this day. By the spring of 1955, the tunnel was complete. British technicians were brought in to install the actual wiretaps on the Soviet cables. The equipment was connected. The recording systems were running. And then, for the first time, the CIA put on headphones and listened. What they heard was everything. And I mean that literally. Soviet military commanders talking about troop deployments across Eastern Europe, generals discussing air defense positions, senior officers debating nuclear readiness timelines. The kind of conversations that American intelligence had been desperate to hear for a decade, happening in plain language on an open telephone line, completely unaware that anyone was listening. The CIA had cracked the Soviet Union open like a safe. The operation ran for 11 months and 11 days. In that time, the recording equipment in the fake warehouse captured roughly 90,000 separate conversations, 50,000 reels of tape. If you stacked those tapes on top of each other, they would reach nearly a mile into the sky. Back in Washington, D.C., a dedicated team of CIA and NSA translators worked around the clock in shifts, some rooms running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, transcribing and analyzing the intercepts. The volume of material was so enormous that the full analysis wasn't completed until 1958. 2 years after the tunnel was shut down, they were still going through the tapes, and what they were hearing was gold. Troop movement schedules, the location of Soviet air defense radar installations, the organizational structure of Soviet military units stationed in East Germany, conversations between Soviet officers complaining about equipment failures, which told the CIA exactly what equipment the Soviets were relying on and how often it broke down. Conversations between officers who were clearly drunk, saying things they absolutely should not have been saying on an open line. The CIA felt untouchable. Bill Harvey, the bulldog who dreamed up the whole operation, became one of the most celebrated figures in the history of American intelligence. He was called America's James Bond. The operation was considered a masterpiece. And here is the thing about feeling untouchable. It makes you stop asking questions you should be asking. Like, why is so much of this intelligence confirming things we already know? Like, why does every conversation we intercept seem to show a Soviet military that is slightly less capable than we feared? Like, why does the intelligence coming through these cables paint such a conveniently reassuring picture? Nobody asked those questions, not yet. Okay, here is where everything changes. I need you to go back with me. Not to Berlin, not to the tunnel. Back to London. 11 months before the first shovel touched the dirt. It is the spring of 1953. The CIA needs British help to pull this off. MI6, British intelligence, has assets and contacts in Berlin that the Americans need. So they do what Allied intelligence services do. They hold a joint planning meeting, a room full of people, maps on the wall, the whole plan laid out in detail. Where the tunnel will start, where it will go, which cables it will tap, how long it will take. And sitting in that room, taking careful notes, is a British MI6 officer named George Blake, 30 years old, soft-spoken, trusted completely by everyone in that building. A man who had worked for British intelligence since World War II. A man who had been captured by North Korean forces during the Korean War, held prisoner for 3 years, and released, decorated, respected. Given increasingly sensitive assignments because he had proven himself under the worst possible conditions, nobody in that room had any reason to doubt him. Here is what nobody in that room knew. During those 3 years in a North Korean prison camp, George Blake had secretly converted to Marxism. Not under duress, not because he was broken, because he genuinely came to believe it. And the moment he was released and returned to British intelligence, he had quietly, calmly, and without hesitation begun passing everything he knew directly to the KGB. Everything. The names of Western agents operating behind the Iron Curtain, safe house locations, ongoing operations, sources, methods. Hundreds of Western intelligence assets were compromised because of George Blake. Some of them were arrested. Some of them were executed. And now he was sitting in a London briefing room learning about Operation Gold. That same evening, Blake met with his KGB handler, a Soviet intelligence officer named Sergei Kondrashev, on a quiet London street. He handed over his notes from the meeting. The KGB knew about Operation Gold before a single bag of dirt had been moved. Let that land for a second. The CIA spent 18 months planning and building the most expensive, most technically demanding intelligence operation of the Cold War. They dug 1,476 feet of hand-dug tunnel under an enemy city. They hid 3,000 tons of dirt in a building. They solved the problem of the melting snow. They installed $50,000 worth of refrigeration equipment. They tapped the cables. They ran the operation for 11 months and 11 days. They recorded 90,000 conversations. They stayed up around the clock for years analyzing the tapes. And the Soviets knew about it before it started. The entire time, George Blake told them everything. So why did the KGB let it happen? Why let the CIA dig for 8 months, tap the cables, and listen for nearly a year? The answer is one of the coldest calculations in intelligence history. George Blake. If the KGB shut the tunnel down, they'd have to explain how they found out. That investigation leads straight back to the London briefing room, and the London briefing room leads straight back to Blake. So they made a choice. Sacrifice the tunnel's secrecy. Let the CIA listen. Absorb the intelligence loss. And protect George Blake at any cost. Because Blake was still inside British intelligence, still trusted, still in the room when the most sensitive Allied operations were being discussed. Every month he stayed undetected was worth more than anything the CIA could ever hear through those cables. The CIA thought it was running a surveillance operation. The KGB was running a protection operation. Same board, completely different game. April 21st, 1956. A Soviet repair crew shows up near the American sector. Routine cable maintenance. Nothing unusual. They dig down, they hit the tunnel, they act completely shocked. Within hours, the Soviets are inviting journalists, diplomats, and photographers to come see what the Americans had been doing under the streets of Berlin. The plan was simple. Humiliate the CIA. Show the world that America had been illegally tunneling under a foreign city. It backfired completely. The world looked at that tunnel, and instead of outrage, they were amazed. Newspapers called it one of the most audacious intelligence operations ever attempted. The CIA was celebrated. The tunnel became a symbol of American ingenuity. The Soviet propaganda victory turned into a gift for the enemy. And George Blake? He wasn't exposed until 1961, 5 more years, when a Polish defector gave him up. Not the tunnel, not the tapes, a defector. So let me ask you the question I can't stop thinking about. Who actually won? The CIA spent years analyzing 50,000 tapes. Some of that intelligence was real. Some of it was carefully managed by the KGB. To this day, nobody is completely sure which was which. The tunnel was compromised before the first shovel touched the dirt. Was it a CIA success or a KGB masterpiece? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to know what you think. If you made it this far, you already know there are more stories like this one. Hit subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.